Every serial killer was once a child. A child who, by some dark twist, grew into someone who found a strange thrill in taking human lives. I've always wondered what kind of child becomes that person. What happens inside a young mind that makes empathy fade, that makes cruelty start to make sense, to the point where another person's pain becomes entertainment? Because the truth is, no one is born a killer. They are made. But made by what? Exactly. What breaks inside a person so deeply that death starts to feel like control? Today, I want to talk about that child. Not the monster they became, but the human they once were. The frightened, lonely human who somehow learned that pain could mean power. If you ever look closely at their stories, the stories of real serial killers, the childhoods behind the headlines, you'll notice something strange. They're rarely violent at first. They're quiet, almost invisible. The kind of child who keeps to themselves. The one who teachers say, he's shy. The one neighbors describe as polite, but distant. And that's usually where it begins. They grow up in homes where fear sits in the walls, where doors slam too often, and no one says sorry after. Where one parent uses their fists to speak, and the other looks away to survive. And in that chaos, the child learns something crucial. No one is coming to protect them. So, they protect themselves. And they do this by shutting down. At first, it's subtle. They stop crying when they're hurt. They stop reacting when they're yelled at. But slowly, something in them begins to change. They stop feeling altogether. Psychologists call it emotional suppression. When the brain learns that feeling is dangerous, so the child adapts. They learn to survive by disconnecting. If love is unpredictable, they stop craving it. If comfort is temporary, they stop trusting it. And over time, the part of them that feels, the part that connects, that empathizes, starts to grow quiet. Dr. Bruce Perry once said, "Children don't grow up in fear and come out fine. Their brains are shaped by the world they survive." That's exactly what happens. They stop feeling altogether. And at first, that numbness feels like safety. But here's where something subtle starts to happen. Something that changes the shape of a person forever. When you grow up feeling helpless, when every day is a reminder that you have no power, your mind starts searching for it somewhere, anywhere. Control becomes the fantasy. Some children try to find control in good grades, perfect manners, or staying invisible so no one gets angry. Others rebel. They break rules, lie, and steal. Because even bad attention feels like power when you've lived your life unseen. But for a few, that need for control grows darker. These are the children who were humiliated, who were mocked when they cried, who were told they were worthless until they started to believe it. And deep down, something shifts. They begin to associate pain with strength. When they were hurt, they were powerless. But when they imagine being the one who causes the pain, they feel strong. It's a dangerous kind of relief. Because for the first time, they're not the one trembling. Psychologists call this compensatory control. The mind's way of restoring balance after living in chaos. It's what happens when someone's entire childhood teaches them that being vulnerable means being destroyed. So, they decide, never again. They learn that power, even cruel power, feels better than fear. That domination feels safer than dependence. That if they control everything, even people, then no one can ever hurt them again. And that's how it begins. Not with hatred, not with evil, but with a child, somewhere, quietly deciding that they will never be weak again. That's the seed. And like every seed, it grows in the dark. When I talk about this topic, people often ask, but don't they feel guilty? Don't they know it's wrong? Well, the truth is, Dr. Robert Hare, who spent decades studying psychopaths, once said their emotional range is like being colorblind. They can describe red, but they've never really seen it. The part of the brain that helps us feel empathy, the amygdala, doesn't light up the same way for them. It's not that they're born without feeling. It's that their early environment trained their brain to treat emotion as a threat. Imagine being hurt, every time you showed kindness. Imagine being punished for crying. Eventually, your brain decides, no more. That's why some of the most dangerous people look calm. Their stillness isn't peace, it's absence. I remember reading Dr. Kent Keel's research on the brains of violent offenders. He said, "What you see isn't evil, it's adaptation." And that's what breaks your heart. Realizing that many of these children adapted to survive pain we can't imagine. And if you do a bit of thinking, you will see that the signs were often there. The child who tortures small animals, not out of curiosity, but because it's the only time they feel powerful. The one who starts fires, not to destroy, but to watch something else scream for once. The one who lies so naturally that truth feels like weakness. In the 1960s, Dr. John MacDonald proposed what's now called the MacDonald Triad: fire setting, cruelty to animals, and bedwetting. He suggested these could be early markers of deeper emotional disturbance. While the theory isn't perfect, it pointed to something real. That cruelty often starts small, in acts of imitation, in moments when a child tries to control pain by giving it to someone else. Psychologists like Dr. Catherine Ramsland describe how many serial killers begin with daydreams of control, not murder. At first, just control, being obeyed, being feared, being untouchable. The fantasy grows in the same soil where empathy once lived. And eventually, fantasy becomes rehearsal. Rehearsal becomes impulse. Impulse becomes action. But even in that darkness, I've never believed they were born that way. They were made by fear, by neglect, by the absence of nurture that the human brain needs, like oxygen. One of the most haunting studies I've read was by Dr. Daniel Siegel, who wrote about mirror neurons. These are the parts of the brain that light up when we see someone smile, or cry, or get hurt. They help us feel what others feel. But children who grow up in emotional isolation, especially those whose caregivers show no empathy, don't get that mirror. Their neurons don't learn empathy because empathy was never modeled. So, they mimic emotion instead of feeling it. They study people like actors study scripts, noticing cues, learning expressions, using charm as camouflage. That's why people describe psychopaths as charming. They've learned how to act human, but under the performance, there's a void, a place where compassion never took root. But I find it fascinating that when we talk about serial killers, we often use words like evil or monster, I guess. It's easier that way. It keeps them separate from us. But if you look closer, what you really see is a person who never learned to feel safe in connection, who learned that control was safer than love, who replaced emotion with dominance. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, in The Body Keeps the Score, wrote that trauma survivors often numb their bodies because feeling is unbearable. For some, that numbness becomes a cage. For others, it becomes a weapon. That's the tragedy of it. A child who once only wanted safety grows into an adult who makes others feel unsafe. A human trying to master pain by inflicting it. But is it all children who go through this trauma that eventually become serial killers? Of course not. Not every traumatized child becomes violent. Most don't. Some turn their pain inward through addiction, self-harm, depression. Others turn it outward through anger, crime, and cruelty. The difference often lies in two things. 1. Whether someone intervened. And 2. Whether they ever experienced empathy. When a child's pain is met with compassion, their brain learns to trust connection again. When it's met with punishment or indifference, it hardens. That's why prevention isn't about fear, it's about empathy, consistency, and attention. So how do we stop that cycle before it begins? How do we raise children who don't grow up needing control to feel safe? The answer isn't complicated. It's consistent love and firm boundaries. Teach empathy early, not through lectures, but through modeling. When you hurt someone, apologize, even if they're small. Show your child that power doesn't come from fear, but from care. Give them words for what they feel: anger, sadness, jealousy, disappointment. Because a child who can name their emotions can manage them. A child who can't eventually acts them out. And when they act out, don't humiliate them. Correct them, but stay connected. Discipline without empathy breeds shame, and shame left alone breeds rage. If you notice signs like cruelty, detachment, or a lack of remorse, don't ignore them. Get help early. Child psychologists can teach empathy training and emotional regulation before those traits harden into patterns. Also pray for the children are a gift from God, so committing them to God's hand is wise. Children who are cruel aren't bad. They're in pain, and pain unaddressed always finds a way out. And for the adults listening to me, and who feel numb, who don't cry, who don't feel, who sometimes scare themselves, this isn't the end of your story either. You can learn to feel again. You can learn to reconnect. Therapy, especially trauma-focused therapy, helps rebuild the bridge between thought and emotion. You start to identify sensations, recognize triggers, and slowly bring warmth back to parts of yourself that shut down years ago. The brain can change. That's not philosophy. That's neuroscience. Neuroplasticity means even the most disconnected minds can heal. If you've ever hurt others and you don't understand why, it doesn't excuse you. But it also doesn't mean you're unredeemable. It means you learned a language of control instead of connection. And you can learn a new one. The hard truth is that not every child who grows up in pain becomes violent. But almost every violent person once grew up in pain. We can't undo what was done to them. But we can stop pretending they were born evil. Because once we understand how they became what they are, we can stop creating more of them. Children need more than food and shelter. They need presence. They need someone who notices when they're scared, who listens when they cry, who says, "You don't have to be perfect to be loved." That's how empathy begins. And empathy, real, human empathy, is the one thing that separates healing from horror. Sometimes I think about the child that every killer used to be. The one who once reached out and no one reached back. The one who flinched at kindness because it felt foreign. The one who learned that silence was safety and pain was power. And I wonder, what if someone had noticed? What if someone had said, "You don't have to be strong here. You can show weakness. You can be loved." If this is done, how many lives would be different? Because behind every act of cruelty is a story that was never told. And behind every story is a child who just wanted to be seen. So truly, no one is born a killer. They are shaped by fear, by neglect, by the kind of silence that turns pain into power. But the good news is, it can stop. It can stop when a parent learns to listen, when a teacher takes a child's anger seriously, when a society values empathy as much as success. Because the opposite of evil isn't innocence, it's connection. And connection, even after everything, can still be learned. So, if you're watching this and you felt numb or detached or cruel, this isn't the end of your story. And if you're raising a child, remember, you're not just shaping behavior, you're shaping a life. Every time you show empathy, you're teaching their neurons to connect. Every time you meet their fear with warmth, you're teaching them love is safe. That's how the cycle ends. Not with punishment, but with presence. Not with power, but with compassion. Because no one is born a killer, but someone can be born again in the safety of love that finally stays. I would like to know your thoughts on this. Do you think some people are born with a killing streak in them? Or are all killers formed from the experiences in their childhood? Let's discuss.